Hello and welcome to Political Brew. I'm Phil Hirschkorn. Today's topic, primary results. 10 days after election night and ranked choice voting runoffs, we finally learned who won the Democratic and Republican gubernatorial primaries. We'll talk about that and the independent candidate waiting in the wings. Then, the 2nd Congressional District Democratic primary to fill Representative Jared Golden's seat in the U.S. House. Who won and how? And finally, the Iran war ceasefire. What are Maine's U.S. senators saying about the deal? If the war is over, what did it accomplish? My guests today are Lisa Keim, a Republican, former state senator and assistant Republican leader, that's assistant Republican minority leader in those days, and B.J. McCollister, a Democrat, a political consultant, and former chief of staff to former Maine Senate President Troy Jackson, who happened to run for governor this year, didn't he? Thank you both for being here.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Hannah Pingree is the Democratic nominee for governor. The result played out before our eyes after midnight Friday, when the Secretary of State's office finally pushed the button to run the ranked choice voting runoff in an instant, following 7 days, more than that, of painstaking preparation, checking and rechecking vote totals, memory sticks of Election Day ballot scanners, and paper ballots in towns too small to use scanners, 487 municipalities in all. After 3 rounds of ranked choice allocations, Pingree emerged victorious, capturing 56.2% of the final vote and coming from behind to defeat Nirav Shah, who ended up with 43.8%. How did she do it? She was everyone's second choice, winning the most second, third, or fourth choice votes from supporters of Angus King, the third, Shenna Bellows, and Troy Jackson. Pingree saying in a statement, "I'm grateful. I'm ready, and there is no time to waste. Thank you to everyone who voted, volunteered, donated, or opened their doors to talk with me about what matters to them and what's at stake in this election. Now, the real work begins." Well, B.J. McCollister, how do you feel about your Democratic primary and nominee?
Well, I'm over the moon about Hannah being the nominee. Obviously, I supported Troy Jackson, the old boss. I would have loved for him to win. But Hannah was a strong second choice for me and a lot of Democrats, clearly. And it's because she has a track record of leading on labor issues. She has a track record of leading on environmental issues. She's experienced. She's ready to start leading on day one. And frankly, she's just overall a very good person. And I feel confident that she's going to be able to make a strong appeal to Maine voters going into November.
You know her from being around Augusta all those years?
Yes, I would agree. She is a nice person. I don't think she has a resume that really stacks up to being a leader in Augusta. She's sort of a Democrat pick. Like, she's had a rosy path lined for her from her mom, and then also being heir apparent to Governor Mills. So I'm not surprised she came out, although she, we do with ranked choice see that a loser won, and so Shaw was the overall plurality pick here. But she does seem to be a very generally well liked, and I think a very solid candidate for the Democrats.
Prepared.
Yeah, definitely prepared. And I mean, when you look at even the portfolio that she had in the Mills administration in her most previous role, she was leading on a lot of issues that were really important to Mainers. Maine has made historic moves in affordable housing. That was all under her leadership. Maine has made historical moves in clean energy and climate change. That was all under her leadership. So she is going to be ready to hit the ground running on day one. And she's got a lot of accomplishments to point to when she talks to Maine voters about what she's done and what she will do.
So Republicans crying for change, are they going to say this is Janet Mills' third term?
She definitely will follow in those footsteps. If you don't like the way your electric bill is, like you said, she's definitely the push there to have green energy, regardless of the cost to Mainers. So, if you want more of the same, we've got Hannah Pingree.
Now, you mentioned her mother, Congresswoman Shelley Pingree, who was unopposed and is going to be running for a 10th term. Will it help Hannah Pingree that Shelley is going to be the congressperson on the ballot, certainly in the southern half of the state, CD1?
I think it's likely to have a sleepy congressional campaign in CD1, so I don't know that it's going to really play that large of a factor. Obviously, the Pingree name is one that people know, so that might help Hannah, but at the end of the day, I don't think it's because Shelley's on the ballot. It's just that Shelley's been around Maine politics for a very long time.
How do you think Hannah Pingree will play in the northern part of the state, the Republican-leaning CD2?
Well, definitely not as strong, right? Pingree name up there with Shelley is, a little more tainted, and for sure, but the bulk of the Democrats, however, are in southern Maine, and they are welcoming a Nepo baby, apparently. And I think that she definitely isn't going to, pull as many votes from northern Maine, where people are going to feel less of a connection to her. But but then we'll see if that matters.
What about fishermen, lobstermen? She did very well in the island communities. Obviously not the most populous, but maybe that's a strong suit.
I mean, it definitely could help. It's kind of wait and see. I'll be interested to see what happens, a little bit further down the road once the dust settles. I'm very curious about her, holding hands with Plattner. In the past, the Pingree that I sort of knew in the past would have put a lot of distance between herself and someone who comes out with the sorts of things that Plattner has said and the type of person that he frankly is. And for her to hold hands with him, I think is going to be problematic for her as well. Especially with women.
She's referring obviously to Graham Plattner, the Democratic Senate nominee, who seems to have brought out a lot of votes in the primary. We had 215,000 voters in the Democratic primary, 90,000 more than the Republican primary. A lot of those, I think, were Plattner voters. He got 154,000 votes. What's the synergy going to be in the fall? Yeah,
I mean, when you look at what the primary turnout numbers were, it shows that on day one, Democrats have, a 90,000 vote lead going into this next phase of the election because of that strong base turnout. Now, if those people stay engaged and they turn out the way they do, and the Republican-based voters turn out the way they did in the Republican primary, the Republicans have such a large share of unenrolled voters that they have to win because they're starting at that 90,000 voter deficit. So the energy, the enthusiasm, the turnout helps Hannah.
Yeah, I think the unenrolled is going to be where the rub comes, especially with Plattner and her alliance with him.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, if you don't already know, the Republican winner for governor. Welcome back to Political Brew. It's official. Bobby Charles is the Republican nominee for governor. Charles captured 60.3% of the final vote after 7 rounds of allocating second, third, and fourth choice votes, beating out runner-up Ben Midgley, who got 39.7%. Charles started out with a significant lead, 38% the first round, to Midgley's and Jonathan Bush's roughly 20%, and he never looked back. He quickly went on the attack, though, posting on X, Pingree, referring to Hannah Pingree, the Democratic nominee, shares every failure of our failed Governor Janet Mills. She also shares her corruption. Hannah and Janet are responsible for every failure of the last 8 years. They've worked arm in arm together in Augusta, running our state into the ground. Now, one Mainer with a particular interest in the winners of the Democratic and Republican gubernatorial primaries is Rick Bennett. Bennett has already qualified for the November gubernatorial ballot as an independent. A longtime Republican state senator and ex-Maine GOP chairman, Bennett argues Maine needs a new governor focused on results, not ideology.
The problem is that for the last generation, politicians have put their parties ahead of the people. Winning the next election has become more important than solving the next problem.
Well, Lisa, we're going to have Bobby Charles in the Republican column, Rick Bennett, former Republican, in the independent unenrolled column. How do you see the race?
Well, first, I want to point out when you said, Bobby Charles won 60 whatever percent of the vote, because of the exhausted ballots, really his percentage is 46% of the vote. And I think it's important always when we talk about this, after, waiting more than a week for results, that we do at least reflect on the fact that ranked choice voting is problematic and doesn't encourage people to have a lot of faith in the system when it looks so messy. And we want to encourage voter turnout. However, for Republicans, Charles was in the lead. He won the plurality of the vote. So there's going to be no complaints on the Republican side about how this came out, except that the process, of course, itself is problematic. I think for Bennett, there's a big difference between him and Charles. I do not see Rick being able to create a lane there very well with Republicans, just because he's trying really, really hard to line up with Democrats. And with a number of his votes that he's had recently in the Senate, pulling the Democrat ballot, of course, that he wanted that to make news because he needs to align himself as much as possible with Democrats to try to lose any association with Republicans. So, it remains to be seen if he's able to even gain traction. I feel like with Hannah being so safely a Democrat candidate and really a rallying around her, I see Rick really struggling to peel people away from her in the Democrat, and he needs people from both to create a coalition around him. So I think that's probably why he's trying to position himself so hard that way. And I think there's a lot of angst in the Republican Party around Rick Bennett. He's a super nice guy. I've always enjoyed working with him. But there's a lot of people in the Republican Party who just look at him now as a traitor. Like, you really betrayed us. So I think there's going to be a struggle for people to leave the Republican Party and vote for him because he's created that sort of angst in his former party. So we'll see what kind of lane he creates for himself here.
Mm-hmm. How do you see the Charles win and Bennett waiting in the wings?
Well, I think Bobby Charles winning is the best news that there could have been for Rick Bennett because, clearly all you had to do is watch the Republican primary debates for the gubernatorial race, and you saw Republicans poking hole after hole after hole in Bobby Charles' plans. You had people saying he had no experience to be running for this. You had people saying that his plans for the budget were going to bankrupt the state of Maine. And, I think that he's going to have a lot of work to do to bring some of those moderate Republicans back into his camp. And, you'll have somebody who is very much a moderate Republican or unenrolled candidate in Rick Bennett. The thing about Rick that's interesting is he's talking about it's a challenge with political parties. We need to move away from political parties. Well, this guy used to be the chair of the Republican Party. He used to be the Republican Party machine. So I think that there is a little bit of a challenge that he's got. He can't really say, I'm the true independent when you have actually led one of the major political parties.
Maybe he'll say what Graham Plattner says, I'm not the man I was 10 or 15 years
Maybe.
ago. Lisa, I'm going to come back to you because you supported Jonathan Bush, and he had this outsider profile, kind of like Bobby Charles. 6 of the 7 candidates on your ballot in the end had no Augusta experience. That was a badge of courage. And as BJ was saying, Bobby, in a sense, was the most conservative one. It's got $4 billion from the biennial budget, wants to eliminate the income tax over time. The most MAGA candidate, if you would agree. How do you see that being appealing in a general election with no ranked choice?
Yeah, I think what Charles is going to have to do is position himself against status quo, right? If you want to see a continuation, if you like the costs in Maine, if you think Maine is going the right direction, then Hannah Pingree is absolutely your choice. If you think Maine is doing well, I think Maine has become more and more expensive, and the results we're getting for the money that we're spending are decreasing as the costs rise. So that's a very easy argument for Charles to make, is he is not a continuation of that. And I think Maine, we can all see from the numbers, the facts tell us that Maine has, as Jonathan Bush said, we're at the top of every list you don't want to be on, and we're bottom of the list that you do want to be on. And yeah, I'm super disappointed we didn't end up with Jonathan Bush as our nominee, but I do think that we have to then look at what do we want to see for change in the state of Maine? And I am still all about, we need to turn around this state. We need to rescue it economically and politically from the ideology of the left that's too far left for where Mainers really need us to be. Okay,
well, it's interesting. 4 out of the 7 candidates were CEOs. You didn't get one of them, but you did get a disruptor nonetheless, right? Who's going to shake up Augusta, he hopes. We're going to take another quick break, and when we come back, Maine's U.S. House battleground. Who will carry the Democratic mantle in the 2nd Congressional District? Matt Dunlap will be the Democratic U.S. House nominee in the 2nd Congressional District. Dunlap came from behind to beat Joe Baldacci in the ranked choice runoff, 52% to 47.5%. I'm sorry, that's not the right number. The 5 is missing in the teleprompter. I'm going to start over again. That's the second retake, sorry. Editor will figure it out. 3, 2, 1. Let's start again. 3, 2, 1. Matt Dunlap will be the Democratic U.S. House nominee in the 2nd Congressional District. Dunlap came from behind to beat Joe Baldacci in the ranked choice runoff, 52.5% to 47.5%. How? Dunlap won a majority of Jordan Wood's second choice and third choice votes to leapfrog Baldacci, about 3,600 more votes, pretty much his margin of victory. Dunlap said on X, today's results tell us that the people want real change and a better future. Together we'll defeat Paul LePage one more time and make sure he's never on a Maine ballot ballot again and will fight for what actually helps Mainers: Medicare for all, affordable child care, a lower cost of living, and stopping the illegal war in Iran. LePage, the unopposed winner of the Republican primary, the former two-term governor who left office in 2019, retired to Florida, moved back to challenge Janet Mills for governor in 2022, lost by 13% but carried CD2, making another comeback now at 77. His apartment over a barbershop in Augusta that he's renting. Dunlap has especially made an issue out of this. He's suggesting that Florida is his real home, where LePage and his wife still own a house and have claimed the homestead exemption, which is a property tax break for primary residences, for 7 years ending in 2025. How do you feel about Matt Dunlap carrying the mantle in CD2?
I think Dunlap was by far the strongest candidate in that race for a variety of reasons. Number one, he was able to play to the progressive energy that is coming from Democratic primary voters. Number two, he used to be the head of the Sportsmen's Alliance of Maine. This is not like a far left candidate. This is somebody who has true, credible, rural Maine roots. And number three, I think what we saw from him and, knowing Matt is he's a likable guy and people enjoyed getting to know him throughout the campaign. I think when you have somebody that's so deeply rooted in Maine that's running for that seat in the 2nd Congressional District, that's a good thing for Democrats.
Now, despite what Dunlap says, LePages are deeply rooted in Maine. He grew up in Maine.
They absolutely are. I think Dunlap was a strong candidate. He's never going to beat LePage. I mean, even in LePage's, worst election, he takes CD2 very strongly. So I believe that LePage will come out the victor here. I'm really glad it's Dunlap. I look forward to their debates. I think he's super fun to listen to. He is a nice person and really smart and interesting. So I think a worthy opponent, but unfortunately, unless there's some massive blue wave that even makes it to CD2, I don't think he's going anywhere.
So he's a strong Second Amendment advocate, Matt Dunlap, but also he's for Medicare for all. I mean, that's kind of interesting mix.
It sounds a lot like a Mainer to me in some ways. He's very purple, and maybe not every Mainer's for Medicare for all, and maybe not every Mainer's really strong pro-Second Amendment, but Mainers have these unique viewpoints that aren't strictly along ideological lines, and that's definitely Matt Dunlap. And you look at his record when he was in the legislature, you look at all the great things that he did when he was our Secretary of State, and I think he has a real appeal to Mainers, and there are Mainers in the 2nd Congressional District that he'll appeal to. The other thing that I would say that's interesting is just the way this all plays out with the larger narrative. On the Republican side, you're going to have a LePage who was Trump before Trump. You're going to have a Bobby Charles, who's basically the AI version of Donald Trump. And you're going to have Susan Collins. And Susan Collins is going to have to run on a ticket with these two very far-right people on a statewide campaign. And that's going to be hard for her.
Isn't she going to need those votes?
Yes, she's going to need those votes, but she's going to have to be careful not to alienate the people in the middle.
What do you see LePage emphasizing in this race against Dunlap and, making this comeback again?
I would say just putting Maine first and making sure Mainers are heard on the national stage. I think LePage really does embody the values of CD2 more than Dunlap, even though, like I said, he will have some appeal. He is an interesting character. He's placed himself very progressive in order to win over that Democrat primary, more progressive than he really was all around the State House, more progressive than sort of I knew him to be. But I do see LePage coming out victorious in this. He has that appeal to CD2 because he truly is a Mainer, and that the story of picking himself up by the bootstraps and making something of himself, I mean, that is still a story that matters and Mainers connect with. So I think that will still
his biography, growing up in poverty, one of many children, kind of left his home at a young age, became a CEO of a Maine company, so on and so forth, right?
Yes, yeah.
It's a good story. Biography and communications, I think, are the two keys in elections.
It's a good story, and Matt Dunlap grew up working multiple jobs. He's worked in kitchens, he's worked on farms. He's got a great story, too.
Yeah, so they're both going to be trying for that so-called working class appeal or regular Mainer appeal?
I think both of them have a good argument to make on that front.
Mm-hmm. And do you think Dunlap's suggestion that he should go back to Florida, stay in Florida, is going to stick, or people know Paul LePage and they're comfortable with him?
I think they're going to be comfortable with Paul LePage, and like I said, it's a valuable question to be asking, and it's a valid question to ask, but still, people are you just can't look at Paul LePage and think, oh, he's a Floridian. Like, he's just been too much a fabric of Maine for so long that's what's going to, I think, win the day on that conversation.
And they've been here every summer since they left. Ann works in a diner, famously. His wife Ann, the former First Lady, so we're going to hear a lot about that. They have Maine driver's licenses. They're Mainers, right?
Yeah.
Last question. Jared Golden had some harsh words about Dunlap when Dunlap first announced Jared was still in the race. Do you think the congressman will stay quiet, or what role do you think he'll have?
I don't think that he will stand by idly and let Paul LePage just run without saying something. I don't think he's going to be a very active campaigner, but I do think he will do what he can to keep the seat blue.
Okay, well, that's our quick wrap-up of the primaries. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to shift gears to the war in Iran. Is it coming to an end? And what did the U.S. win? After 15 weeks of on-again, off-again attacks on Iran, a peace plan, now called a Memorandum of Understanding, is in the works. President Trump, while overseas in France, signed that ceasefire that might stick. But critics like Senator Angus King criticized the deal as one-sided, with only one win being the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. But that's just a return to the status quo before Trump started the war. King says the checks on Iran's nuclear program are weak, while Iran is being awarded $350 billion in reconstruction money and unfrozen assets. In Washington, Vice President Vance defended the agreement.
A couple of things that are still true and will be true whether the Iranians comply with the rest of the deal or not. Number one, their nuclear program has been completely destroyed. Their capacity for enrichment, the facilities at which they were using to develop enrichment and develop a potential nuclear weapon, those facilities are still destroyed. Their conventional military is still destroyed. Their capacity to threaten their neighbors is still largely gone. And now we see whether they are willing to comply with the next step of the president's peace plan.
We certainly didn't get much in this deal, and we certainly didn't get anything close to justifying the expense in American lives, civilians killed, cost to the American taxpayers. We've paid about $60 billion in the last 4 months just in the U.S. in additional gasoline prices because of this war.
And Republican Senator Susan Collins told us the MOU raises a lot of questions and the administration should provide a thorough briefing to the Senate. Lisa, did the Trump administration win this war?
Well, I don't think it's over, right? I mean, this is, again, a 60-day sort of truce where we're looking at opening the Strait of Hormuz in order to have some, I think, relief to the world, right, while talks continue. I think this was a miscalculation on the part of Trump. He thought that if we were able to blockade their ability to, Iran's ability to sell oil, that it would bring them to their knees, I think, is what he had said. And we found that that didn't happen. So definitely there is, there's some recalculation happening of, okay, what are we going to do? The difference, the greatest difference here is that America cares about our people. We care about the people of the world, in fact. We're dealing with Iran, who does not care about their people. They don't care if their people are hungry or don't have electricity or any hardship that their people go through. They will sacrifice anything for military power to have death to Israel and death to the USA. Those are their chance. That's what they're going for. So how do you deal with an enemy that's like that? I do think that one really important thing that has come out of this is we have seen what's happened, the precarious position that the world is in being held in the hands of Iran, who hates much of the world and does not care about the terror or the pain that they inflict to anyone, whether you happen to be just a bystander to their main objective, which is to take out America and Israel, or if you happen to actually be one of their enemies. So the Gulf states are now changing their way of thinking about how they're going to do business in the future. The world has seen what an issue the Strait of Hormuz is and whose hands it is. So I think we needed to go and explore what's happening here. I think some recalculation, and I am, I'm disappointed as well that we're shifting our gears so much.
BJ, how do you see it?
The only way to look at this Iran war is to go back to the beginning on how Donald Trump has messed this up. He tore up an agreement that the Obama administration made that was giving the country of Iran about $55 billion, and he replaced it with a plan that gives them $350 billion. He said that we need to destroy their nuclear program. We heard that from J.D. Vance. Well, he told us that the nuclear program was destroyed last fall before we sent any forces into Iran for this war. He told us when he was campaigning that we were an America First country and that we weren't going to go for regime changes, yet he pursued a regime change, and he's putting money into Iran. Now let's talk about the money he's putting into Iran. We just heard in the last year that Americans could not afford to extend the subsidies for the Affordable Care Act. And as a result, Americans are paying a lot more for health care. We have spent more money on this pointless war with Iran than it would have cost to extend healthcare subsidies for Americans. So we've decided to send troops in harm's way to end up in a place where we have a deal that's worse than the deal we had under the Obama administration. We've lost lives, we've lost money, and people still can't afford healthcare.
So under the Obama administration, Iran was still continuing to grow their nuclear weapons. They were close to having one ready, they said themselves, and they have a more enriched uranium than they've ever had. And that was all under Obama's agreement. There was no oversight. We don't know, like we can look right now and we can say, and none of us know in this room, I'm just going to be clear, like we're not the insiders here. But the fact that there was bunker bombers and they said, oh, we got the nuclears, you know, we laid waste their nuclear capacity, and then we went back in a second time. I don't believe that the military would do that. I mean, this isn't just Trump. These are top military advisors saying there's something else to go after here, and they went after it. I get it, it's expensive. I don't like the shifting sands under our feet. I think there have been some miscalculations. I don't disagree. But we can't lose sight of the fact that if our number one enemy, the number one, well, maybe the number two enemy if we talk about China, but the number one terror sponsor of terrorism, if they have nuclear capacity and they want to come after the U.S., we don't care how much it costs, right? The problem lies in making sure we would have a little more clear information. However, I'm assuming a lot of that is top secret, and so there's probably less information coming to us. But on some level, you have to trust that the military leaders are not just bombing dollars away for no good reason. And we do know that they were increasing their nuclear capacity under Obama. So we needed more.
Just, BJ, quickly, the last word. What U.S. interests were served here? Is this going back to being the global policeman?
I don't think there were U.S. interests served here at all. I mean, what we just did is we took a country that I think everyone agrees was a threat to the United States and made them $350 billion richer. Well, that's what the outcome was.
I mean, that money is not going to them yet, and it's not supposed to be any U.S. money, but that is one of the things that I think is uncomfortable as well.
Well, we'll have to leave it there for now. Lisa Keim, BJ McCollister, thanks for being on our show this week, and thank all of you for watching.